Gentlemen, it's a great honor to be here. I'm privileged to receive this prize. And we agreed that this presentation would be in English, and I explain why. Not because my English is perfect, but actually the topic. The topic is about Global South and the war. And we decided that it would be good to have it open to the public and to have it recorded, and then with a possibility to spread around the world, because this is a topic which is interesting for lots of people abroad, but also in Ukraine. I saw somewhere here Mr. Ruslan Spirin, which is a great honor for me because he is a special representative of president, I believe, of president of Ukraine in Latin American and Caribbean countries. And so great honor for me. And by the way, next week, Kyiv Mohyla and Democratic Initiatives Foundation, we will have an event together, closed event with Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So I will not go into details, but this is topic of interest for many people. Now, let me share the screen.
Just a moment. I'm sorry for interruption. Колеги, ми маємо домовитися, я дуже перепрошую, бо я ще не надав слово, Олексій Васильович. Я просто вас перепитував. Чи ми попередньо домовлялися вже про...
The president. So first, do you see my presentation at this point? Do you see it?
Yes.
Okay, great. This award, I received this award for the collection of articles which was published abroad in English, French, Spanish, German, Italian, and devoted to global consequences of the Russian aggression. And I remember how it started. In 2015, there was a visit of South Koreans to Kyiv Mohyla Academy, and they met me, and they were interested in what's going on in Crimea and Donbass. We had a talk, and then I received a suggestion. Please write an article how Russian-Ukrainian conflict is influencing the problem of unification of Korea. And first I was quite surprised, but then I started to work on it, and actually it appeared that there are many aspects. And yes, the war, which actually started in 2014, has geopolitical consequences for many reasons of the world. Many of these articles were written together with our former student, Petro Burkovskiy, who is now executive director of the Democratic Initiatives Foundation, and now he's serving in the Ukrainian Army. Okay, so I just decided to put a list of these 7 articles because I think it's important for those who is interested. Then it would be, the person would be...
We are sorry, we cannot see the list of the articles. Can you please step on the first slide?
This is first?
Yeah, but we can see the map.
Oh, sorry. Share the screen. Okay, screen. Share. Now.
Yeah, now we can see. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Now you see. Now I see. So this was my first introduction, and then there is a list of articles. So you see in Latin America, about China, about influence on Northeastern Asia. There is a very interesting article which was published in Pakistan. About the influence of Russian invasion for South Asia. So those who would be interested, they would be able to see these articles. But now let me get to the point without further ado. And you see the slide. the slide of the vote in the United Nations General Assembly on territorial integrity of Ukraine after the so-called sham referendums. When we have discussion about the role of Global South and its attitude to the war in Ukraine, we may hear, first of all, from Russian propaganda, but not only from Russian propaganda, but some voices from the world that basically this is a war between the West and Russia. The West is supporting Ukraine, but other countries are not supporting Ukraine. So BRICS countries are not supporting Ukraine. The other countries of Latin America, Africa are not supporting Ukraine. So when I hear this argument, I always demonstrate the map of the votes in the United Nations on territorial integrity of Ukraine. And you can see those countries which are in green, they are supporting the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Only several countries in red, and you may see that this is Belarus, Syria, North Korea, and Nicaragua, during this particular voting supported Russia. So the result is 143 against 5. And I think this is a very good result. Unfortunately, we can see also the countries in yellow, which abstained from the voting, or the countries in blue, which actually voted by the left. So they get out of the room and decided not to vote. So let's talk more about it. So again, if you watch this map, then you will see that most of Latin American countries, they are supporting Ukraine. Basically, almost all Arab countries are supporting Ukraine territorial integrity. In Africa, more than half of African countries are supporting Ukraine. Those which are supporting Russia in the United Nations are very, very few, from 0 to 3. And such countries, and Indonesia, for example, is supporting Ukraine. Indonesia, Philippines, Malaysia, Cambodia, in Southeast Asia, they are supporting Ukraine. But the question is, what is next? Okay, you are supporting Ukraine in the United Nations. By the way, we should be frank that when we are going and to the resolutions on human rights, the number of support to Ukraine is declining. It's still the majority, but the number of those who are supporting these resolutions is declining. And the answer is simple, because unfortunately, many of these countries, they have their own problems with human rights. So they do not want to support any resolution on human rights. Some of these countries are not democratic countries. Some are led by dictatorships, and definitely they are not going to support the resolutions on human rights. But basically, let's come back. That is a map on territorial integrity of Ukraine, and we feel support of the whole world, not only of the West. So this is very important, because it's not the war between West and Russia. You see by this vote that this is a war where Ukraine is supported by majority of the countries of the world and by the civilized world. The question is, what is next? Because one thing is to vote diplomatically, which is very, very important, not to give the floor to Russia or to Russian narrative, but what is next? What about joining economic sanctions? What about militaries to support to Ukraine? What is about excluding Russia from the UN Human Rights Council? By the way, Russia was excluded, and it was supported by some countries of the Global South, like Argentina, like Democratic Republic of Congo, and this year Russia tried to be re-elected, but Russia wasn't re-elected. So I think when we are talking about the countries of the global south, we need to be quite realistic. Okay, so in sometimes many of these countries are weak economically. So it's not realistic maybe to expect that they will join economic sanctions. However, we may ask them at least to diversify their economic ties. And this is happening. I will give you example of India. India was the largest exporter of weapons to India was Russia for many, many decades. Actually, it supplied 70 or 80% of India's armament. And during recent 2 years, Russia lost the first place. The first place is France. Okay, so India is, and also United States, and also Israel, and also other countries. So Russia is still important provider of weapons to India, but it's not on the place number one. So there is a diversification, and this is very important. We may, when we hear about military support, supplying of weapons to Ukraine, yes, again, not many countries may supply weapons, but there is an example of Morocco which supplied details to Ukrainian tanks which were of Soviet origin. So Morocco had spare details and they supplied it to Ukraine. So something can be done. And even if it's not so, even if it's not the way, even if we do not receive direct military or economic support, again, even diplomatic support is very, very important. So when we are dealing with the global south, there is an information or disinformation war, and Russia is trying to produce certain narratives, and we know these narratives. So we need to remind the countries of global south that the war is not the reason of NATO expansion, because you see the blue line. Ukraine were not supporting joining NATO before 2014. And these Ukrainians were in favor of being neutral, of being non-bloc. And that's why Yanukovych actually made it official. Ukraine officially was non-bloc country, like most countries of the global south. Ukraine gave up nuclear weapons. Ukraine received the guarantees of territorial integrity, including from Russia, and everything was violated in 2014. So it's not because NATO wanted to expand to Ukraine or to the east, it's because Russia attacked the neutral non-bloc status of Ukraine. And we need to remind it to our friends from the global south. So the reason is not security reason. What is the reason? And here we need to go into history, because believe me, not many people in this part of the world, they know the history of Eastern Europe. And I always show this map, English language map, which was produced not by Ukrainians, which shows the composition of states in the year of 1000. And I'm asking, please look, what was the largest state in Ukraine? What was in Europe? What was the capital of this state? And we know that the capital of this state was Kyiv. By the way, Kievan Rus is actually invented. It wasn't the original name of the state. Okay, it was invented later. So it was Kyiv Principality. And I'm saying that I don't want to ask to find Moscow on this map, because Moscow didn't exist at that time, as we know, as we all know very well. But history is a very contradictory process. So when Ukraine became part of Russian Empire, we know how Ukraine was called officially in the Russian Empire, Little Russia, and we were officially called Little Russians, and Ukrainian language was banned. We know these facts, but this is actually the revelation for the countries in the global south. They don't know about it. So, and it helps us to explain what's going on right now. So the former colonial empire is trying to come back and to erase us as a nation. And this argument is well understood in many countries of Africa, America, and Asia. So we need to reframe the narrative and to show that this is actually a continuation of anti-colonial struggle. We know that in 1991, Saddam Hussein attacked Kuwait, and he said that Kuwait doesn't exist as a sovereign state. It was part of Iraq. Very, very close to the arguments which are used by Putin, and actually very rare similar arguments, because it's not usual to hear these arguments in the modern world. But the countries of the world united in a composition. And here I give the example of African countries which joined the coalition and which sent the troops. In fact, this is only African countries with quite a large number of soldiers. But there were also Arab countries, Muslim countries, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Saudi Arabia, Emirates, which sent tens of thousands of soldiers to liberate Iraq. Unfortunately, this is not the case with Ukraine. And we understand why. Because Russia is a nuclear power. But the question is not only about it. Actually, unfortunately, we may say that in the global south, there is a positive view of Moscow and the Soviet Union, which helped these countries to become independent countries. And here I would like to show you the country of the Cold War, of two blocks, red with the Soviet Union and the Western one with the United States at the head. But also you see many rose colors in Africa, in Asia. What's the explanation? The explanation is that Soviet Union not only helped many of these countries in the anti-colonial war, which is true, but Soviet Union also tried to impose Marxist model in Africa, for example, and there were so many People's Republic in Africa. For example, People's Republic of Angola, People's Republic of Mozambique, of Congo, of Benin, People's Republic of Bangladesh, actually, People's Democratic Republic in Yemen, People's Democratic Republic in Algeria, and Ethiopia was called officially Socialist Ethiopia. So the Soviet Union tried to impose this model, and all these Marxist experiments, they failed, they collapsed. And actually these countries, at the end of the day, they had to rely on economic resources from the West. But they still have the view that the West is bad because the West was colonial power or a union of colonial powers, and the Soviet Union wasn't a colonial empire in their view. I often heard, and I visited certain countries during last year in the global south with different delegations on different occasions, that look, Soviet Union, Russia didn't have colonies in Africa, so it's our ally. So we need to change this narrative, and we need to remind these countries that actually Ukraine was a founding member of the United Nations. And we know that this was a trick of Stalin diplomacy, that Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, like Belarusian Republic, they became the members the United Nations in 1945. But nevertheless, Ukraine was a member of UN Special Committee Against Apartheid, and it was co-sponsored many resolutions against apartheid and about colonization. Ukraine, not Soviet Union. Again, maybe this was a trick of Soviet diplomacy, but from the formal point of view, it was Ukraine. And Ukraine was deputy head of this committee, specifically Mr. Udavenko, future Ukrainian Minister of Foreign Affairs, was deputy head of this committee, and the head was Nigeria. And on many, many occasions, actually, it was Mr. Udavenko who was holding this council and promoting different ideas about decolonization and fighting apartheid. ANC, it's very difficult to work with South Africa because African National Congress, again, it sees Moscow as its traditional ally in fighting with apartheid. But 300 ANC members, they were trained, military trained, in a camp near Odessa. Many future leaders of African countries, including ANC, they were also trained in Ukraine. And finally, when we are talking with South Africa, I am telling them the story of Lukyanenko. And then I ask the question, look, this person was sentenced to death. He spent 27 years in prison. And then he decided to make a compromise with the communists in order to reach the independence. Does it remind anybody to you? And they think, and very quickly they reply, oh, it's like Nelson Mandela. Actually, it's like Nelson Mandela. Actually, it's a very delicate topic, because South Africans, they consider their historic experience, of fighting apartheid and then gaining the victory as a very, very unique. However, when we are talking by giving these examples, they started to think that there is something in common. And by the way, when there were first independent elections in 1994 in South Africa, Ukraine sent, it was independent Ukraine, and we sent a group of observers, about 40 observers, to observe the first free elections in the history of South Africa, which was where Mandela was definitely elected. Now, let's talk a little bit about Latin America. There are very, very strong left movements in Latin America. And for example, if we are talking about Mexico, the whole world knows the names of three monumentalists: Siqueiros, Rivera, and Orozco. And a lot of their paintings, if you go to Presidential Palace in Mexico or other galleries, so you'll see Lenin, you'll see Trotsky, you'll see Marx, which are depicted on many, many pictures. Again, Mexico got the constitution in 1917. There was a Mexican Revolution, and to a great extent, they were inspired also by the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. Siqueiros, Rivera, and Orozco, they were left. And nevertheless, you see now, this is a part of the fresco by Orozco, and you see it was done after World War II. And you see here that actually despite he was left, but he equated Nazi and communism. So again, when we find these examples and we show it to our friends in Latin America, in Mexico, we are trying to explain to them what is the difference between socialism and communist type communist regimes. And we should to ask them logically, whom the left should support. They should support the victim of aggression. They should fight against imperialism. They should fight for freedom, for democracy. So the logical way is that the left in all these countries should support Ukraine. But in many cases, it's not happening. And one of the arguments of these countries is that we belong to non-alignment movement. And because we belong to non-alignment movement, traditionally we do not support, we are neutral. And this is not the case actually, because non-alignment is not about neutrality. Non-alignment movement was founded in 1955 by such figures as Nehru, Nkrumah, Broz Tito, Julius Nyerere, Sukarno, and all others. But they were not neutral. In fighting with colonialism, they were very active. In denouncing America's war in Vietnam, they were also very, very active. So being a member of non-alignment movement doesn't justify that you are neutral. Moreover, we hope that these countries should throw their voice and efforts to support Ukraine, which is quite difficult, which is not easy, frankly speaking. Look, when I first started to visit these countries, I thought that if you provide the arguments which I'm providing to you, if you know that Ukraine, it was Ukraine which gave up nuclear weapons, Ukraine which was attacked, it would be easy to formulate your position in support of Ukraine. And unfortunately, this is not the case. Again, because, you know, this anti-Western rhetoric is coming to many people in this world with the blood of mother, with the milk of mother. They were treated in this way, that the West is enemy, and Soviet Union and then Russia were supporters of these countries. So by the way, what I realized, so when we started to explain in these countries that Putin is trying to recreate the Soviet Union, and we use this argument very often in our domestic discussions, and we consider it's a very brilliant argument, very persuasive argument. But in these countries, it doesn't work well. Why? Because for them, Soviet Union historically was a friend, or at least a force, which was used as a counter force against the Western colonizers. So it's better to frame that this is a fight for our freedom from the former colonial empire. When we are talking about it, when we are talking about the ideas of Russian chauvinism, restoring Russian empire, it works quite well. By the way, regarding Crimea, because again, we often hear that Crimea is Russian. And so we are asking our friends in these parts of the world, when did Russians come to Crimea? End of 18th century. And when did first white settlers came to South Africa and started to colonize South Africa and to declare that South Africa is their land? Also end of 18th century. So there are some interesting historic parallels which may support our arguments. With the war, Ukraine, with this full-scale invasion, Ukraine became much more much more active in this part of the world. And so we may hear from office of President Zelensky that for many years, you know, these regions were neglected. We started to change the situation. Partially, this is true. But this is not only because of the war, and this is not only because of President Zelensky. Actually, Ukraine contributed a lot and was active long before. Ukrainian peacekeepers, and here is the list of mention of Ukrainian peacekeepers only in Africa, because Ukrainian peacekeepers were also on the Middle East, in other Asian countries. Oh, even in Latin America, there were some observant missions. So you see that Ukrainian peacekeepers were on different missions in African countries, in 10 African countries. And these missions were very, very large. What is interesting is that Ukraine kept its peacekeepers even after the start of the Russian aggression in 2014. And the last contingent of Ukrainian peacekeepers was withdrawn from the Democratic Republic of Congo only in September 2022. So it shows that actually, until the recent moments, Ukraine were trying to stabilize the situation in Africa, while Russia tried to destabilize. What were the reasons when Ukraine maybe was not very active during some periods in these countries? Well, objectively, after the independence, the two main vectors, two main directions of Ukrainian foreign policy were Europe and the West, and the second was Russia, relations with Russia. So objectively, we were concentrating on these countries. And definitely, if we're talking about resources that we have compared to Russian resources, definitely our resources are not as large as Russian resources or Russian corrupt money. And we know how it is used. But as I mentioned, as I try to demonstrate, we have a lot of arguments, historic arguments, the arguments of the present day, which shows that the truth is on our side. If I, oops, something is, what's wrong? Okay. When we are, but we need not only, when we are talking about the arguments that we need to present to these countries, and I see that I need to finish soon, we know about the formula of President Zelensky, which describes different points of potential cooperation between Ukraine and these countries. And there are many, many areas, for example, again, human rights, deportation of Ukrainian children. And that's what these countries understand, because these countries, many face deportations, genocides. For many countries in Latin America, but also in Africa, in Asia, this is topic which they can understand. But for those countries which do not want to politicize their relations with Russia, we are trying to find some pragmatic arguments. And pragmatic argument is food security. The food security, energy security, the ecocide, and you'll see the map of what happened after destruction of Kakhovka Dam, what's happening in this place, but also the issue of nuclear security. Because never ever in history, the nuclear power was occupied by foreign military. It never happened. Russians did it for the first time. And this is the threat to the whole world. So when we are trying to combine, you know, food security, ecocide, nuclear security, and explain it to the dangers, explain these dangers to the whole world, at least it gets attention. And there are figures which demonstrate this attention. So when the first meeting of the national security advisors to presidents of different countries was taken in Copenhagen, there were about 20 plus countries. Now we had in Davos, there was a fourth meeting, and there were about 80 countries and organizations which joined the discussion of Zelensky peace formula. Okay? As I said, Zelensky peace formula tells us about different aspects, and there are 10 aspects. So, and basically not every country, it's quite flexible, frankly speaking. Not every country is ready to stick to this or that point. Okay, so you can find a topic on which you would like to work and participate in discussion of this topic. And let's give you an example of South Africa. As I mentioned, South Africa is abstaining from the votes on Ukrainian territorial integrity. South Africa, India, Pakistan, they are abstaining. But South African representatives are working behind the scene, and they are quite active in discussing the topics, for example, of on humanitarian issues, on deportation of children, and on regional security. It was announced quite recently that there would be a global summit on peace in Switzerland, which Ukrainian diplomacy would like to conduct with participation of these countries. So now it's almost 80 countries. Let me be frank with you. I don't know how it will proceed, frankly speaking, because when we have so many countries, definitely there would be disagreements. So basically here I would like to hear more arguments and actually what is the task of Ukrainian diplomacy, how they are going to move forward, what statements they expect. So there is some sense of unclarity about it. But as it is said, sometimes it's kind of strategic unclarity, okay? So it gives possibility for maneuvers. We'll see how it will develop. Regarding other peace plans, and we know that there was a Chinese plan, but Chinese plan actually, there are some points which could be used, again, about nuclear security, about food security, but Chinese plan repeated a lot of Russian narrative, frankly speaking. So we didn't hear about it for quite a long period of time. Now we hear about African plan, and this is the first peace plan which African leaders are putting forward to solve the situation outside of Africa. There are some points which overlaps with Zelensky plan. So there is a possibility to move forward and try at least to build our trust on based on certain bricks in this formula, in these plans. So this is about potential positive development, but there are also negative developments. So let me briefly talk about that, and then I will still try to find a silver lining in the cloud, a positive note on which to finish. So when we hear about expansion of BRICS, and we know that originally BRICS was Russia, China, India, and Brazil. Then South Africa was added. And we see that these countries actually, they are taking different positions. Brazil is voting in favor of territorial integrity of Ukraine. Russia, we know Russia is aggressor, and other countries, China, India, and South Africa, they abstain. a very good result for us was actually the decision of International Criminal Court to start investigation against Putin. And as a result of pressure from the civil society in South Africa, from civil society in many other countries, South African government hesitated because they understand they wanted to have good relations with Putin. But at the end of the day, they understood that no, Putin shouldn't be invited not virtually, offline to the summit of BRICS. So I think this was our victory. But there is a diplomatic bargaining and decision of BRICS summit was first about expansion of BRICS, and next BRICS summit will be held where? In Russia. So next BRICS summit will be in Russia. The BRICS is enlarged. It's joined by Iran, which is definitely not a good sign. It's joined by Emirates. It's joined by Ethiopia, which is, frankly speaking, a bit changes the nature of BRICS, because previously the members of BRICS were the largest and the most influential regional centers of power. Ethiopia has a very good record of anti-colonial struggle, and the headquarters of African Union is in Addis Ababa. But Ethiopia is a very poor country, which depends actually on the Western support, Western financial support. By the way, Russian investments in Africa are about 1%, and Russian trade over with Africa is about only 2% of all the African trade over. So, and there is a civil war in Ethiopia now. So what will happen with this expansion of BRICS? And Argentina, by the way, decided not to join BRICS. I think that it will be used by these countries to show that the world is really a multipolar world, that there is no one-polar domination. The United States and the West are not the only pole, and there would be a lot of rhetoric about it. At the same time, if we analyze the domestic cohesion within BRICS, I believe with expansion of BRICS there would be different trends, and there would be more differentiation, and it will become more amorphous. Why? India, we don't like Indian narratives in this war, and Indian narrative is anti-Western narrative. But what is the main threat to India? From what country? From China. So basically, India is with China in BRICS, but India now is relying more and more on military support from the West. And also India needs financial support from the West as well, and innovations. And Indians are openly talking about it. They're openly talking about it. They're saying we need Russia because Russia to counter China on the land, but we need also the West to counter Chinese influence in the sea, and we need Western influence for economic development of India. So the West is not the main enemy of India. That's understood. If we are talking about Saudi Arabia or the Gulf countries, again, what is a major enemy for them? The West. All of them have American bases on their soil. They want it because the main threat for them is Iran. So my point is that with expansion of BRICS, we will receive a lot of propaganda statements, which would be used by, first of all, by China. because China will say the world is uniting around us. It will be used by Russian propaganda. It will not be good for this informational war which is going on around Ukraine. But at the same time, we shouldn't overestimate it. And I believe there would be a differentiation within BRICS, and this anti-Westernism would be limited to rhetoric and narratives. So, to sum it up, to work in the global south is very, very difficult. It's not easy. And sometimes I may hear, and every time when I appear on Espresso channel with Fortnikov Vitaly, he's saying, oh, our resources are scared, so let's concentrate them on those countries which we have from those that we have military support, but we cannot lose other countries as well. Again, majority of the world is in global south. We need their support. So we need their support in international organization, and we need to continue our work here. And I'm also very happy that Kyiv Mohyla is participating in this work and also establishing relationship with universities in this part of the world. We have now relations with African universities. We are discussing with Indonesia, with Mexico. So let's proceed. Thank you very much. Дуже дякую, дорогі друзі.
Thank you very much, Alexey Vasilyevich, for your very interesting and informative presentation. And we understand how important are all these issues in the context of current Russo-Ukrainian war and changing of global security system. And now we have questions and answers session. Please, dear colleagues. Do you have
Can I ask a question, please?
Yeah.
Well, actually, my face and my voice is not maybe audible and visible, but do you hear me or not?
Yes, we do.
We do.
Yes, okay. Thank you very much indeed, dear Alexey, for the sketch and for the review you have done for this very short period of time I just allocated to you. And you have traveled around the globe and you have a chance to communicate, to observe, to speak, and to discuss many, many issues. And you just this or that way reported to us and showed the tension of the global situation and the disposition of different forces around the globe. But there is one very principal issue here. If we compare the powers and the resources of different camps around the globe, of different powers around the globe, east, west, south, and so forth, actually, we usually resorted to different kind of arguments, material, human resources, and so forth, and so forth. These resources and this capital, let me say power capital or power which might be used in this or in that way, and Russia is resorting to applying this kind of weapons, but at the same time, he definitely declared in turn that if fate of Russia will be put at brink, Russia will resort to nuclear power and will proceed with the nuclear war. The nuclear argument, this power and this weapon, to what extent, as for you, changes or just reshaping the disposition of different political, economic, and other powers around the globe? Just your point of view in terms of nuclear weapon and in nuclear weapon arguments which could be used, applied by Russian fascists.
Okay, thank you very much. As I have said, that's the difference, and we know about the difference. It's not a secret why we had international coalition to liberate Kuwait. and even Soviet Union didn't object against military intervention, and why it's so difficult to mobilize military. And actually the Western position is also cautious, a bit cautious here. So that's understandable. However, if we are talking about position of the global West, when Putin was engaged in nuclear rattling, and we remember it at the very beginning and first year of the war, China and India, they said to Putin, and it was reported that it was informally, some things were said formally, they said to Putin, don't be engaged in nuclear rattling. And we saw that, it worked. So I think here, this is a pragmatic point where we can mobilize global South countries, and we may show that actually what Russia doing is with nuclear power stations is totally irresponsible, because Rosatom is trying to continue to have deals in these countries. So we may show that you shouldn't trust Russians. They don't know how to behave even with nuclear power plants, Chernobyl and Zaporizhia and others. So don't rely on their support. So this is an important question, and but I believe that actually this is one of the arguments for us, and how to organize more powerful support from other countries of the world when we are talking about nuclear blackmail. We may continue to talk about this point, but we don't have time, so we'll continue, Pane Valentin.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, any more questions, please? No questions. One more question.
No, there is what is the progress of, there is a question, what is the progress of the ministry in developing the strategy program on cooperation? Was it approved to unite efforts to... Okay, so first of all, in the chat, there is a message from Ambassador Ruslan Spirin, who is a special representative to Latin America, and thank you for your comment. And the second comment, actually comment is very close to this one, because this is a question about Ministry of Foreign Affairs, how successful is Ministry of Foreign Affairs in developing the strategy on cooperation with global South countries, and are they trying to unite efforts of Ukrainian think tanks and universities? So my answer is that I am not insider in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but both myself and Maxim Yakovlev participated in the activity of public council under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We participated in different actions. There are some closed meetings, and there are colleagues here, I see Ivan Fichko, who may confirm it, that yes, Ukrainian civil society is conducting meetings with representatives of MFA. A lot of them are closed, and I think we have contacts with with our ambassadors in different countries, and I would say that in many countries we have very good ambassadors. I may tell you a secret, not pleasant for us. With this, for many years we do not have ambassador in Ethiopia, and this is not good, because there is a headquarter of African Union in Ethiopia, so it limits our possibilities. But with many other ambassadors, they are doing really good work with limited resources. So I would say that last year and this year I see this growing cooperation. I will not go into details because a lot of this is closed, but the strategies are developed. The strategies of MFA regarding specific regions, Asia, Africa, and Latin America. So I think this is the right approach, but resources are limited. Resources are limited, so we need to be inventive and creative.
Thank you, Alexey Vasilyevich. And I should remember about timing. And unfortunately, the presentation took longer than we expected. That is why now
Because
we
we
will
started
have
a little
the
bit